Hi, my name is Winnie Holzman,
I'll just go into my first question here. Growing up, what did you want to be?
a writer,
Yeah?
and also an actress. In a lot of ways, that was my focus. In some ways, my focus was acting, but I always wanted to be a writer. And then I ended up, you could say combining those things by being the kind of writer who writes for actors.
When did you first start writing as a kid?
Really young, like started writing poetry and little stories, but mainly poetry when I was like I guess like fourth grade or third grade or something like that.
Was there stuff that you watched growing up that influenced your journey as a writer?
Sure. How how could I watch stuff and not have be influenced by it? Um, well, sorry, that's my phone. I'll just put it on silent. Um, well, that's a big question. I mean, when you say watch, are you talking about TV?
Any medium, plays, TV, movies,
Yeah,
anything?
I mean, everything I saw influenced me. I was lucky, my family brought me to theater. And, I can vividly remember seeing my first Broadway show, which I think was Fiddler on the Roof. And it was very emotional and vivid and alive and exciting. And, but even shows that weren't on Broadway, I was taken to and as a little one, and, they were very, arresting for me, theater. And then on TV, everything like, when I was a teenager, the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Um, when I was younger than that, you're too young to know these shows, I
I
think, but
absolutely love Mary Tyler Moore. It's one of my
oh,
favorite
great.
shows.
Well, that was a groundbreaking show in a lot of ways, and it really affected me because the women in the show were very vivid characters and very important characters, and it was a it had a lot of meaning because she was pursuing her own career and she wasn't married, and that was a message that hadn't been on TV before, really, not almost never before, but
Mhm.
certainly not that. You know, Other times that you'd see that on TV when I was growing up, the girl always had a boyfriend, like a steady boyfriend, and you knew that she was planning to get married soon.
Mhm.
But with Mary, it was different, And also, when I would watch the credits of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, there were women's names that would creep up who had been writing the show, and that was the first time I saw that I mean, I realize now that when I was little watching I Love Lucy, there was a woman writing I Love Lucy, Madeline Pugh, and I'm not saying you didn't see those women's names, but somehow in 1970, when I would see that woman's name, Treva Silverman, who's someone I know actually in real life through my husband, lucky enough to know her. When I would see that name, I would have this feeling like, wow, that's possible, you know, as a career. Although
Mhm.
I wasn't really thinking about that, oddly enough, that was almost subliminal because I wasn't really planning to have a career writing TV, not consciously.
When you went to college for writing, for poetry, I believe, how has poetry influenced your writing? You said that like that the rhythm, you really use the rhythm while writing. How has that influenced you?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I think I am just a rhythmic person, if you can say that. I mean, some people say, "Oh, I have no rhythm." Well, I do have rhythm. So, um, so poetry obviously is rhythmic and in some ways connected to people's heartbeats. And there's a but there's other elements of poetry having to do with word choice and brevity, just the elegance of, for instance, if you write metered poetry or you write a certain, rhyme scheme, then then very carefully distilling, or even if you're not, even if you're writing free verse, but you're distilling down in order to find the right word and image. And it's all it ends up being distilled and kind of powerful, hopefully in that sense. And when we writing the book for a musical, say, or writing anything for screenwriting has to do with having brevity, ultimately. I mean, you don't start out that way. You
Yeah.
don't start out going, I'm going to write something and it's going to be as short as possible, because that's not really a good plan for writing.
Mhm.
But eventually you get to that point where you're distilling down the scene, both in a musical and on screen, and you're finding sort of the most potent, pungent way to say something in the smallest amount of time, actually. And that, to me, has a connection to poetry. Um, and also, I guess that that in some ways, I mean, this is all so subjective, and maybe it's just my own take. Obviously, everything I say is just my own take. But with poetry, it's almost like you're trying to convey feelings that are nuanced and complicated, right?
Mhm.
I guess with any good writing,
Yes.
but it is like, if you sit down to write a poem, you're sort of aware that you want there to be a certain amount of complexity, and sometimes it's like the sometimes the artistry of it is that it looks so simple on the page, and there's so much in there, right? Hopefully, I mean, I'm not saying I'm able to do that, but that's the goal. That's your ambition. And so when I'm thinking that way about, that's almost like a training to have a scene have complexity in it. Do you know what I mean? And not just one idea, perhaps. I don't
Mhm.
know if that makes sense, what I just said, but
It does make sense. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of your writing. It's like absolutely amazing. I'm wondering, like, how would you describe yourself as a writer?
oh, I don't know that I really could. I would just say I keep trying to write. It's not. I read something on someone's Twitter page. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the person. I'm so sorry, but it's like another writer. And he was saying he's a novelist, apparently, because he was talking about novels. And he said something really beautiful. I'm going to butcher it by paraphrasing it, but he said something like, every time you write another, well, in his case, novel, you know, something, he said something like, you need the combination to a safe. You
Mhm.
need to unlock something, and you know what a safe is, and you need a combination, but that doesn't mean you know what the combination is. And every time you have to just keep running down those numbers till you get them in the right order, and it unlocks something. And that is I mean, I'll go back and see if I can find him. And maybe I can get you a message of what this man's name was, because I thought it was beautiful. And it really spoke to me. Obviously, I don't write novels, but that's how it feels to me whenever I do anything, a new project. It feels like, well, yeah, I know basically what the sort of, you know, what's in front of me, but that doesn't mean I have the combination to the safe.
Mhm.
And I'm going to have to find this combination. No one's going to give it to me. I can't look it up, right?
Mhm.
I'm just going to have to discover it. And as I describe it, it sounds kind of exciting, like an adventure, but of course it's filled with very, very discouraging moments.
What would you say is like the biggest challenge of being a writer and the biggest reward from that?
Well, sort of what I just was describing. I think one of the big challenges, not to complain, but that it can get discouraging because you can feel every time like you don't know what you're doing. And I was talking about this recently to a class um, that I think was a class, or who knows, but it was like, um, that feeling, that's such a strong feeling that you have no idea what you're doing, that you feel utterly lost, is part of the creative, it's part of being a, you know, being a, being involved in a creative enterprise. Any creative enterprise makes you feel that way. That's part of it. So it's not like you're doing it wrong. Actually, you're doing it right.
Mhm.
And you're doing it great. You're right on the money. And everybody who you admire, who's a creative person, who's an artist you admire, has felt this way most of the time. Okay. So that's important to know intellectually. But when you're feeling it, it really can feel, it can really be a devastating feeling that sweeps over you, right? I mean, lost is lost.
Mhm.
Confused is confused. Feeling like like you were foolish to ever begin something
Mhm.
is a big is a, you know, is a strong, compelling feeling. I think the thing that has happened now that I'm older is, I mean, I don't think, I know, is you, because I've just logged a lot of hours doing it, I realize, oh, that's just a feeling, and that feeling just has nothing to do with reality.
Mhm.
It's a feeling that's sweeping over, but that's, so that's the biggest challenge to me. And also just rejection. You know, you get, this happened to me just this past weekend. You know, you get rejected a lot. You could be working on something for years. And I didn't mean 4 years, I meant 4 years.
Mhm.
And or you could be working on it for 4 years if that's what happened. And so you'd be working on something and giving it your whole heart and soul, and you know, they decide not to buy it, you know, or the powers that be decide not to go forward with it, right?
Mhm.
And again, that just happened to me, so it's fresh in my mind. And that's, again, one of the things that can be very comforting, a thought, if you're looking for a comforting thought, and I am always, a comforting thought is, everyone I've ever admired, every writer I've ever admired, or even any artist I've ever admired, you know, has gone through plenty of rejection and plenty of harsh critique, right?
Mhm.
Like, that's the name of the game. That's what happens. You can't have a career, a creative career, and not experience that multiple times. So it's like, that's comforting because you're not alone, and and the people that you most admire have gone through it. But again, when you're going through it, it's something. It, you know, it's something you have to face. I mean, listen, it's a high class problem, right?
Yeah.
Some people have real problems. So I mean, most people have bigger problems, are facing bigger problems than that. So I keep that in mind too. That, you know, because it's basically an ego thing. It's like, you know, you want the approval, you want people to say, oh, we love it. And you know, I've had people um in situations like this, in interview situations,
Mhm.
say to me, why didn't you write more for TV? You know, and I was like, you don't get it. I've written a lot more stuff that didn't get put on the air, right? And it was, in my mind, just as worthy as all the stuff I wrote that did get put on the air. Okay. So that's just, that's, you're talking about a challenge. That's a challenge mentally and emotionally, right? And spiritually, to just kind of know that that happened and handle it, you
Yeah.
know?
What would you say the biggest reward would be?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, one of the biggest rewards is that, first of all, that you're, in a funny way, every day is an adventure because you're exploring, you know, you're learning all the time,
Mhm.
right? I
Mhm.
mean, you're nodding so much, so I figured you must be a writer.
Yeah, I do write stuff.
You're learning all the time. It's a way of life that helps you to grow as a person. And how lucky am I, and my friends, people I know who also do this, that what we do for a living, a career, truly teaches us, you know, about how to it asks us to grow and empathize with others. Like when I'm writing other characters, I'm putting myself in their shoes, so I'm intensifying my empathy quotient, right? and then just the great people that you meet, because the kind of writing I do, I'm not a novelist. I'm not saying novelists can't meet people, but um, when I end up with a project that people do want to get involved with, it's I meet a lot of people, and it's we all do it together, and that becomes like a family, and it also becomes, hugely inspiring to learn from others, so it's the collaborations I've had. I'm sure I've answered your question.
Yes. Before I move into some questions about some of your work, I'm wondering, how did you first get into the industry? Like, what was your first move into the industry itself?
Well, I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it's so long and kind of a long winding road, and it's not like, oh, let me get into this industry, oh, there's the door.
Yeah.
It's not like that. But basically, when I got out of college, I went to acting school
Hmm.
in New York City, and I was working as a nanny to put myself to be able to live in New York. And I was going to acting school, and in acting school, I met some people who we formed a comedy group together, and we performed this comedy all over Manhattan, in various very small venues, and we had a great time, and we also learned a lot because we were writing our comedy and also performing it. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that it's sort of a circuitous thing, but that was how I ended up applying to musical theater program at NYU, which
Hmm.
is a graduate program in writing musicals, because a dear friend of mine from college encouraged me to join, and I used the material I'd written in my comedy group. What I'm trying to say to people is, if I hadn't been in that comedy group, I wouldn't have had all the material ready to apply. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
To this program. I got into the program, which was a huge piece of good fortune. And I had incredible teachers who were really the luminaries, of one of whom, Steven Sondheim, recently passed away, in the great Steven Sondheim, but all of them were great. And I've learned incredible amount from them. It was very inspiring. And what I'm trying to say is that, unbeknownst to me, years later, and I mean years later, someone I met in that program who knew my writing in the program very well was the brother of one of the main producers of a show called 30 Something.
Hmm.
And through a fortuitous happenstance, I ended up meeting this man who, his brother knew my writing. And this man, Richard Kramer, said, I think I heard from my brother that you're a good writer. Maybe you could be a good writer for our show, which is a huge show and my favorite show on TV at the time. So I wrote a spec for that show, 30 Something.
Mm.
Took me all summer. I gave him the spec, and I honestly just really thought, well, maybe he'll just have some good tips for me.
Hmm.
But they hired me. So that was a big, that was really, life changing. All of it was. So you see, I had to tell the whole story, and of course, I'm leaving out a ton of stuff. I'm
Hmm.
leaving out a ton of stuff, but you see what I mean. That one thing, I mean, that's what a career is like in my experience. Something that you end up doing just because you feel like it would be really fun, or you feel moved to do it to interest yourself
Hmm.
and to learn, and just to get out there, right? So you put something out there, and years later, somebody had seen it and told somebody else about, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but you have to be, I mean, the moral of the story is, if people are watching who are, I mean, looking for advice,
Hmm.
um, you have to be putting something out there in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, it all started, you see what I'm saying?
Hmm.
If I wasn't working and writing and getting better at my writing, that's I left out a ton of stuff, but I was writing the whole time. So
Hmm.
it's like, by the time I got to the 30 something guys, if I hadn't been like working on my writing at that point, I was 30 something too at that point. If I hadn't been working on my writing, I couldn't have gotten through that door, if you see what
Yeah.
I mean. Do you see
Mhm.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So so there's a lot that goes into it, in other words, I did meet the right person, but if my writing hadn't been, developing and developed, by the time I met that person, it wouldn't have mattered.
Mhm.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice. Um, Kind of a last concluding question for this section is really fun question that I really like. Out of all the characters you've written, and this is kind of a hard question to ask on the spot, so if you
I'm
can,
already reeling and saying, I don't want to answer this question.
okay, well, out of all the characters you've written, is there one that you relate to like the most, or the one that you like wrote with yourself in mind?
Well, the truth is that, all you have is yourself and your friends and your family and who you've met along the way. But they're all filtered through yourself and how you view the world. And I try to put, like I was saying before, myself in other people's shoes. I try to imagine what it would be like to be someone else. But honestly, of course, I've used myself with, every character.
Yeah.
And or people I know really well, but or people I don't even know that well. But what I'm trying to say is, like, I can't choose because I'm always using myself in different ways. So there's really no um I don't really think there's a favorite.
That makes sense. It's a
Oh,
hard
you
question.
didn't say a favorite. You said who was most like me.
Yeah, still kind of a hard question though.
Yeah, I don't know. When I find out what I'm like, I'll let you know.
I think that's the perfect transition into questions about my so-called life, which I'm so excited to talk about. I absolutely love my so-called life, which is streaming
Oh,
on Hulu if people want to know where to watch it.
it
Um,
is. I
it
know.
Yeah, it's really had like a new generation of people watching it. It's one of my favorite shows out there today because it's like authentic and timeless and extremely relatable. And I guess my first question about it is, how did you come up with the idea for this show?
Well, the I was mentioning the show 30 something before. I
Yeah.
started writing on that show, and the two gentlemen who created that show and were the executive producers of that show and wrote a lot of the show, Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz.
Mhm.
They tapped me basically. They had another pilot commitment at ABC, and they said, "We'd love you to write it for us." And then we just started talking about, well, gee, what could it be? What would it be? My mind was very open, and they were describing how they'd always wanted to do a show about a teenager. Um, so they started saying to me, what if you did a teenage girl? Now at the time, I was a mother. I am a mother. My daughter was about I guess she was about 6 at that point.
Mhm.
So I wasn't thinking about teenagers. I wasn't thinking about them at all. I'd been a teenager, but I was glad that was over. And I wasn't I wasn't going, gee, I wish I could go back to my teen years and
Mhm.
mine that for material. But when they said it to me, I so esteemed them. And also I just trusted them, their instincts, almost more than my own.
Mhm.
And because I just looked up to them so much. So it was a natural for me to say, well, I wouldn't have come up with that myself, but let me just do it, because they seemed to like the idea. Then once I started getting into it, I, I, it's almost what we were talking about before, what the novelist had said about a combination to the lock, and you find the right combination. I tapped into it somehow, and it felt really right after that, but it took me a little while.
How did you pitch the show and get it greenlit?
Well, first of all, back then, nowadays I could never get the screen without more cannibalism or, you know, but at the time, the network was very high on these guys. In
Mhm.
other words, I was just brought in by the guys, and they trusted the guys too. So the fact that they were bringing me in, they just trusted those guys. The guys were very they looked up to them, the network that did. They looked up to Marshall and Ed. So I was riding their coattails, if you see what I mean. So when we went in and we pitched it like, we want to do a teenager, her authentic life, her thoughts, we want to get into her POV, you might almost say. And I remember saying something like, her mother, I remember I said something like, her mother's 40 and her mother's going through her own hormonal and emotional changes.
Mhm.
So it's almost like the two women, the young one and the older one,
Mhm.
are going through a sort of a crisis of identity at the same time, but they don't realize it about the other person. And I'm not saying that's why they put it on the air. That's probably would have been a reason for them to go, oh, I don't think so. But they mainly put it on the air out of trust for Marshall and Ed. And it was on rather briefly, as I think and one of the reasons was they were confused by it. I would put it that way. The network was very confused about how to market it.
Yeah.
Is it for teens or is it for adults? I kept saying it's for whoever likes it, but they were confused and ultimately, canceled it, which ended up, as you probably can guess, ended up really being fine and great. I mean, we're now, all of us who are involved, and a lot of us still know each other pretty well. We love that it was short and sort of, it feels just right.
Yeah. Well, this show starts out with a bang and it has a phenomenal pilot. And there's so many like story moments that you put into the hour, yet it doesn't feel that way because like as a high schooler, it kind of is that way when it comes to life. So how did you choose what you wanted to put in the pilot and started out with?
I think, it's very hard to go back and remember how, honestly, because I think, there's a mystery to writing. And what happens is you're writing and you're writing and you're writing and it feels kind of leaden and boring. And then you get a thought and that thought comes from your unconscious. And you probably wouldn't have had it if you weren't in the midst of writing. You have to be writing in order for your unconscious to sort of step in. But I know that one of the things we wanted to do, the three of us planned, that we wanted to show her life. What's her life? What's her family like, and what are her friends like? And I wanted it to be a time of total transition.
Mm-hmm.
Where she didn't know, she was changing her entire life. It was like if you looked at her, she looked sort of, except for dyeing her hair. I mean, she looks the same on the outside, but inside she's realizing, like, I'm questioning everything.
Mm-hmm.
Who my best friend is. What's the point of anything, right? Why am I here, and who am I? All the huge questions.
Yeah.
So it's like anything that could bring that out. So it was the basics. Like I remember thinking, I mean, we did this together, the three of us. We planned the story sort of together, and then I kind of went off and did my thing. But it was like, who's her family? Just set up her family, set up her school, and her school life and her friendship issues. And then we wanted to have what I would describe as kind of like, I wanted her to lie to her parents. And I wanted her to have an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if we always knew that the adventure would go south the way it does.
Yeah.
But I think I intuitively felt like it's going to feel like what I wanted to do is have it be an exciting adventure in which really nothing happens. They never get into the club.
Mm-hmm.
They have a great time without getting into the club. And then this dangerous moment occurs, which is real. It is danger, but at the same time, there's something exciting about it because something's happening, but it's scary. And then the most exciting thing is that, she just spots, she spots him across, he notices her
Mm-hmm.
while she's getting into the cop car, you know, mean, that's the most exciting thing that happens. But that's not even a conversation with someone. He just said, "Oh, I know her."
Hmm.
So it's like that's the kind of thing I was looking. That was what interested me. Like a whole night where almost nothing happens, and it feels like everything happened.
Yeah, I really think you accomplished that because it totally did that. Um, and the show itself tackles so many issues in like this only 19 episodes, this one season, from family dynamics to gender norms and class and sexuality and other things. How did you approach tackling so many topics in this one season?
Well, honestly, well, first of all, we didn't we didn't know it was only going to be one season,
Yeah.
but I mean, I wasn't I wasn't thinking in terms of topics. Let me
Mhm.
put it that way. I never thought in terms of topics, and I still don't really. I don't think like, well, how can I approach a topic? It's more like, who are they, and what are people wrestling with? And I don't see it as like an outside topic that has to be explored.
Yeah.
Um, Although I do end up exploring, but it's like it's all through people's experiences, characters' experiences, if you see what I mean. So, when I thought of the show in the beginning, I always knew she was going to end up meeting and having a, a gay male friend, because that was part of my life when I was a teen. But I also loved making him someone who was somewhat ambiguous and ambivalent about who he exactly was.
Hmm.
Because I didn't want him at 15 to be like, I know exactly who I am. I know exactly what to call me. I wanted him to be experimenting and trying to figure out his place in the world. Um, and the same with all of them, really, including the grown-ups.
Yeah.
So that was sort of how I saw everybody. So because of that, different topics, as you put them, subjects come up. You know, um, if you think about it, I mean, you're like, what about to graduate?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about your years in high school, what what didn't come up, right? I mean, it's like it's everything. It's a microcosm of the world, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah. And I think another reason that this show is so significant, like you were talking about in another interview, is that the protagonist is played by like an actual teenager. Um, and I read where you had said that you felt it was time for a teenage girl to be front and center. What is your opinion, which is kind of separate but related? What's your opinion on adults so often portraying teens in movies and sitcoms? Like,
Well, I get it, and a lot of it has happened because, for understandable reasons, having to
yeah,
do with, like when Claire Danes was doing our show, she had this she's a genius actress, obviously, an incredible person and very strong person. So she handled it brilliantly, but she had a crazy schedule where she had to be in school part of the time.
yeah,
So that and for that reason, I'm sure that there's a lot of people who go, let's hire an adult. And
yeah.
it's all understandable. That's not a big thing to me. It's just that we were really going for authenticity. And so what we started doing with our show was we made sure that a certain amount of scenes per act didn't have Claire in them, so that she was able to, it still was an immense load on her
Mhm.
shoulders. But if there were two scenes in every act that she wasn't in, the show was makeable. Let's
Mhm.
put it that way, in terms of hours. Um, you know, all of them were, I mean, Jared was the oldest, and I
Mhm.
think he was 20 or 21, I think. But they all were pretty young, but Claire and Devin Gummerswell were the youngest. And Claire was the youngest of everyone.
Mhm.
Claire was only just turning 14 when we wrapped the pilot.
Wow. How did you, because I feel like a lot of shows can sometimes lose this, but like throughout the entire show you just capture the voice of a teenager and you maintain it through the whole show. How did you keep that there?
I feel like I was kind of just remembering my own teenage years and just, some people might say of me, oh, you never really left them. Maybe people find me a little teenagey, I'm not sure. Maybe not anymore now that I'm so much older, but back then, maybe I seemed a little teenagey even. But it was easy, that's also where the acting gene comes in because, I was not the acting gene, but the acting experience because I wasn't as successful like I'm a professional actress as a
Mm,
career, but I had done a fair amount of acting over the years. And, it's a little bit like that, isn't it? It's taking on that role. And of course, I'd been a teenage girl and I'd been surrounded by teenagers when I was in high school.
mhm.
I was remembering it, I was channeling it, I was going back in my mind and in my heart to salient moments, like the moment in the pilot where they switch shoes.
Yeah.
To me that's a memory I have of doing that with a girlfriend, and how like that was a typical kind of thing that we would do that was very entertaining for us, but it's not the kind of thing you always see on screen, it's just a little detail,
Hmm.
but those little details bring a feeling of authenticity.
When you were in high school, did you ever think that you would like write a show about high school? Did you ever have that idea?
No, no. Oh, no, no, I didn't. I don't think so. No, no. When I was in high school, I was really focused on doing my acting and in a way trying to ignore high school in a funny way because I didn't find high school comfortable. But I
Mhm.
mean, who does? I guess a lot of people don't, but well, some people do maybe, but I didn't, I was awkward in high school to some extent. But I was observing a lot, I guess you could say that.
Yeah. Before I get into some final questions that I'm gonna have about Wicked, I have like two more questions left about this. You said that everyone who was involved with creating this series really liked how like ended up liking how short it was and how have
Yeah.
have you ever thought about doing a follow-up? And if you did, where do you think those characters that you created might be today?
Well, I've had people approach me about it and I've thought about it a little because of that, but I must say I don't really want to do that. I mean, I never say never, but I don't want to revisit it because I feel like I like how it turned out.
Hmm.
And so I don't want to kind of come back, and I'm more about trying to find new things and brand new, different things that I haven't done before. I'm more excited by that. What would have people done and stuff like that? Don't ask me that, Olivia. No. I'm not sure I know. I mean, I just hope they all had a good life.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope Jordan Catalano, didn't end up in jail.
Yeah. Um, kind of connected to my so-called life, but moving more into Wicked. Steven said that he wanted to work with you on Wicked because of my so-called life and how you really understand women of that age. Can you walk me through like his contacting you and you deciding to collaborate on this project?
I won't because we won't have time. That's such a long story. But honestly, it wasn't that simple. Again, it was more like we met each other because of another possible project that somebody wanted us to possibly do together. We started talking about the novel of Wicked because Stephen was obsessed with it, and I knew about it too. And then like it's got to be 6 months later or maybe even more. Um, he called me saying, "You will not believe this. I think I've convinced Universal to let me make it into a Broadway musical." Because at the time he had been trying fruitlessly to get permission to do that. And he was so persuasive that finally Mark Platt, who was the head of Universal, and was a huge and is a huge Stephen Schwartz fan. he saw the light and he said, yes, let's do it. And that's when Stephen contacted me, and that's when we started to have conversations. And he lives on the East Coast and I live in LA, so we started out by having really long phone conversations about what we were envisioning, and it turned out that we were seeing a lot of our visions matched really well, and that's really why he. In other words, So-Called Life was great, a great way for him to become aware of me.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't have just asked me to do it without talking through, and also he knew I had written a musical with a friend of mine when I was younger, before my So-Called Life, and he knew that musical.
Right?
Yeah, and I think that gave him a lot of, impetus. Because he knew that I knew musicals. I'm not saying I knew them the way he knows them. He's like a world-renowned expert, and he's incredible. But I had the experience of writing one musical, so that gave me something, and I think it gave him some confidence that I could do it.
What was it like for you starting the process of writing it?
Of writing Wicked, it was intimidating because it's a very long book. I don't know if you know the book of the novel.
By Gregory. Yeah.
Right. By Gregory Maguire. And it's, who's an incredible writer. But the novel of Wicked, as written, is not really what we wanted to do. We both kind of knew that. And so there was an intimidating factor because the idea that Gregory had is so brilliant, to make the Wicked Witch of the West the protagonist of the story.
Yeah.
So genius idea. We wanted to live up to that idea. And if we were going to change things, we want to, really make an impact. And, it was intimidating for me also, because I'm working with someone who, it was intimidating, but it was also thrilling, obviously. And he's an amazing collaborator. I just didn't want to screw it up.
Well, there's a modern trend that, to me, Wicked started, and that's the revelation of an antagonist as a sympathetic character. What was it like?
Like Cruella. Cruella.
Exactly. What was it like reimagining a character that used to be seen as like the villain type to a character that like audiences love and can sympathize and connect with?
It was exciting. It's a thrilling idea, and Gregory is to be credited completely with that idea. But then when we got a hold of it, we were like, what do we want? What do we see her journey as? We made some big changes from the novel.
Yeah.
And now I'm stumbling with words, because this was an all-encompassing experience. From tears to joy. There was plenty of devastating moments, and there was plenty of high moments. And he's an incredible person to write with. Let me just say that. And then when we got Joe Mantello involved, who's our director, who directed it on Broadway and of course all over the world, Joe just brought so much insight into how images and ways that we could make her more incredible. The character, you don't often get a chance to take on an iconic, I never use that word, but she is iconic. People use that for lip gloss now, so it's ridiculous, So it's just like, oh, this is an iconic lip gloss. Yeah, right. But she is an iconic character. She's a that's a great American movie. So it's intimidating to move into something that is so known and so beloved. So we were very respectful. I think the biggest word I would use is, he and I were very respectful of the character and of the movie. We didn't want to do anything that would make it seem like we were not respecting the intensity of feeling people feel for that character and for that movie.
Hmm.
We want to almost like add to it, not undermine it. You see what I mean?
Yeah. And I don't know if you had this intention in mind, but this really is a musical for all ages, because it's a family favorite and both the kids and adults can enjoy it. So what has that been like for you?
Well, I mean, it's very fulfilling, and it's made me feel great. It's made us both very happy that, but that wasn't our goal. I mean, we really truly were, just because if writers are listening to this, and or young writers, we were really focused on the basics. What is our story? First of all, what is our story? Who are our characters, and how can we best convey this story,
Hmm.
right? And how can we best unfold it so that for the maximum impact and emotion? Okay.
Hmm.
And that, so we were just dealing with the basics of that. We weren't going like, I see the audience is this age. And,
Yeah.
no, I mean, I've never done that in my life. And I'm not, and the reason I'm shaking my head like that is because I don't think that's a great way to approach, your work.
Yeah.
I mean, that's result oriented, and it's sort of ass backwards, basically. You want to be telling your story and finding ways to make the story all the richer, with every draft.
Hmm.
Like as you do drafts, you sort of going, well, in this draft, I want to find ways to make her deepen her as a character, make her more complex, make her more interesting, give her more humor. That was one thing we really needed to do at one point between San Francisco and Broadway, is we realized because Glinda was so funny, we realized that she was coming off as kind of humorless, which was my, mistake. And so, well, it's part of a journey. I mean, it's part of a process. So
Hmm.
I was then at the part of the process where I'm going, okay, well, how can we make sure that people understand she has a sense of humor? It's just she has a different style than Glinda completely.
Yeah.
She's not going to be funny in the same way, which is great. So they both were funny ultimately in different ways, hopefully.
They definitely were. Um, and I will use the word iconic here, even though we talked about the lipstick. 'Cause there's so many iconic moments and songs in the show. And when you first heard a song like Take Gravity in its entirety for the first time, like what did that feel like for you?
Thrilling. I mean, I have a memory of, it wasn't the first time I heard it, but the first time I heard Adina
Yeah.
sing it with, I believe I was hearing a recording of it because she had been rehearsing, and I think Joe recorded it or someone recorded it and just played it for me on their phone because I wasn't in the rehearsal,
Hmm.
because I was locked in a closet rewriting. They would hardly ever let me out. This is like pre our opening, before opening on Broadway, and just hearing her, and I think it was the first time I heard her really sing the whole song. Those are kind of goosebumpy moments.
Yeah.
And I remember a moment when Steven had just written For Good, and I was on the phone with him because like I say, we live in on different
Yeah.
coasts, and we're not always together. And he played it for me over the phone. And I was in my office. I was writing a TV show with those guys, Marshall and Ed, once and again. And I was just listening in the middle of a work day to this incredible song. And then it was like, I think he says like, do you like it? Or no, I was like, I was like dissolved in tears. Yeah, I like it. I think it might work.
What was it like seeing the whole thing, like the whole thing for the first time with the costumes and the lights and the makeup and everything?
Well, we moved from, we tried out in San Francisco, which was a much smaller theater. And that had its own issues and challenges every day. Then we got to this theater, the Gershwin in New York, and it was so much bigger, so much bigger. And
Mhm.
that's what we wanted. But I remember the first time I walked into the Gershwin, before the set was even loaded in, And I remember being next to him, to Steven, and I got terrified. It looked
Mhm.
so big. And I thought, how are we ever, because to me, and this is the funny part of me, and I mean, it's sort of funny about Steven too. I always thought of the show as intimate, and I know that might sound funny, but I always thought of it as having as being an intimate show, because there's so many moments when I thought of them as very intimate, quiet moments,
Mhm.
or just private moments, almost like between two characters. Or so when I saw this big, huge theater, I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Like, was anyone going to notice the show? And I didn't really realize what was coming. All the incredible, the incredible sets from Eugene, and the incredible costumes, and the way Joe had the lighting, the amazing way that Joe found these incredible stage pictures, and he filled it and filled it. So when I was writing, I never thought about stuff like that. I was thinking about the two people in the scene, you
Yeah.
know. I never thought about what it would be like on stage in a funny way. Because, well, I did eventually, but you know what I mean? To get started, you just picture them in real life, like talking, or you know
Mm.
what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Wicked has become a smash hit, changing the course of Broadway forever. Did you ever think it would become this popular? Like, did you feel it at all?
Well, not this part.
Like,
I started to feel, it took a long time, but I started to feel, okay, people are having an intense emotional reaction to the show. Not everyone. I mean, I'm not delusional. I know some people, aren't. It's not for everyone. That's great. Nothing's for everyone. But except I guess Dolly Parton. I think Dolly Parton is for everyone. I, but it started to dawn on me slowly. It took a really long time, because I was really focused on, like I said, not screwing up, and just making it as good as I could do my job.
Mhm.
So I wasn't really focused on the outside world that much. But yeah, I mean, it was, it's been amazing. It's been surprising and amazing. And I'm thrilled.
So kind of like two last questions, and these are about the movie version you're working on right now. You're adapting Wicked to the screen currently, which I'm super excited about, and everyone's super excited about. What's it like returning to something you did years ago? And is it intimidating at all to adapt something this iconic, which I'll say kind of again, even if you created it?
What do you think? Yes, it is intimidating. It is intimidating to me. Yeah. And exciting, but intimidating. Yeah. Cuz yeah, for a lot of reasons, but also exciting. And it's been again, it's been kind of everything. There've been times when I've been so grateful to get to revisit the material, because there's ways in which it becomes even richer for you. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It deepens for you. It has for us, for Stephen and I. I don't mean to speak for him, but I know he's expressed that to me. At the same time, there's been times that I wanted to throw the whole thing across the room and go, I'm done with you people. This is too complicated. Because you want to save the things that are precious, that people really do want to see. You want to make sure that you're still making it into a movie. You don't want to just make it what it is on stage, because you have abilities to do so much more, do so much different kinds of things on screen.
Hmm.
But you want to stay true to the spirit of the show. You know what I mean? You don't want to lose that. So it's a delicate balancing act. And that, I can honestly say, that's what we've been doing, off and on for years when we've worked on it. Is we've been really, really trying to strike a balance between finding the new, keeping the old, and just finding that right balance that we're hoping is the best way to present it on screen. And so that's really meant delving into every single moment, really, really, really deep, if you see what I mean.
Well, what's it like adapting something from stage to screen? Because you're talking about like trying to keep the different moments and like that must be challenging. Is
Well, you can't, I never think of it as trying to keep in a funny way because you want to open your mind.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
One of the biggest things I've done is try, and Stephen has done too, is try to open our minds, but at the same time, yes, you want to acknowledge that certain things in the script, the way it's done on stage, we love them and we don't want to jettison them. So again, I don't know if I'm answering your question right, but it's been this constant back and forth between keeping our minds open, listening to our director, taking in what his great ideas, which, and we have this wonderful director, John Chu, and he's really wonderful. And he's had so many inspirational ideas for us. And yet there's always been times when we go, wait a minute, we're not sure we want to do that because we're not sure that fits with the show. Do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
of course he's coming in from the outside. He loves the show, but he's understandably, he wants to make sure he's making a movie, not shooting the show. And so it's been a really great conversation. Honestly, it involves a lot of conversation, and it's been wonderful. He's such a great guy. So it's been a real pleasure.
Kind of a last question here. What's it like working with like seeing a new cast do it? I'm
Oh,
excited to
it's
see
so
the yeah.
exciting.
Yeah.
You mean when a new cast comes on Broadway, or do you mean the movie?
The movie.
Yeah, well, it's very, I mean, those two women, I don't know if your viewers know who it is, but it's
Yeah.
Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba and Ariana Grande as Glinda.
Mhm.
And we just feel blessed. I mean, I am over the moon about the casting. And for both women, I'm so excited, and I feel lucky. I feel fortunate and blessed that they said yes, and that they are up for this, up for it and down for it. And we haven't cast the rest of the movie yet. So,
Yeah. Well, everyone's really excited to see it. It's going to be amazing. Last question here of like everything. This is one of my favorite questions to ask people that I interview. And that is if you could give your past self a piece of advice, what would it be?
oh, that makes me almost want to tear up. Um, wow. Well, I guess I would say, don't be scared. It's all going to be okay. But the truth is, I would say that to anyone, not just my past self. I would say that to you, Olivia. It's like, don't be scared. I mean, obviously, sometimes it's appropriate to be scared,
Mhm.
but I mean, don't be scared that of writing, of expressing yourself, of letting yourself be yourself. You're okay. You're wonderful, I would say, and I would say just it's all okay.